The evacuation sirens had been screaming for 3 days straight. Captain Marcus Chen stood on the roof of the Velthari Refugee Center, watching the last civilian transport lift off into the burning orange sky. The ship carried 2,000 Terran citizens to safety. It did not carry any of the 12,000 Velthari refugees huddled in the buildings below. "Sir, that was the last transport," said Lieutenant Sarah Park, climbing up through the roof access hatch. Her face was covered in dust and sweat. "Command says there are no more ships coming." Marcus did not turn around. He kept his eyes on the sky, where the transport was now just a small dot of light disappearing into the clouds. Behind him, the distant thunder of artillery fire rolled across the plains. The Crixian forces were less than 50 kilometers away and advancing fast. "What about the Velthari?" Marcus asked. "Command says they are not our responsibility. We are ordered to evacuate immediately. A shuttle is waiting for us at the southern landing pad." Marcus finally turned around. Sarah was holding a data pad with the official orders displayed on its screen. The words were clear and direct. All Terran military personnel were to evacuate Velthos Prime within 6 hours. The Velthari civilian population was to be left behind. "The Velthari government requested our help," Marcus said. "They opened their borders to us. They gave us access to their trade routes. They trusted us." "I know, sir, but the orders come directly from Admiral Reyes. The Terran Assembly has decided that defending Velthos Prime is not strategically viable." Marcus took the data pad and read the orders again. He had served in the Terran Defense Force for 23 years. He had followed orders through dozens of conflicts across 100 worlds, but this order felt different. This order felt wrong. Below him, in the courtyard of the refugee center, thousands of Velthari were gathered. They were tall beings with blue-gray skin and large, dark eyes. Their bodies were thin and graceful, built for a world with lighter gravity than Earth. Most of them were civilians who had fled their homes in the northern provinces when the Crixian invasion began. They had come to this city hoping the Terran forces would protect them. They had trusted the humans to help. A young Velthari female stood near the gate, holding a small child in her arms. She looked up at the roof where Marcus was standing. Even from this distance, he could see the fear in her eyes. She had seen the transports leaving. She understood what it meant. "Lieutenant," Marcus said slowly, "how many soldiers do we have left?" 87, sir. 3 platoons, plus the medical team and support staff. About 120 people total." "How much ammunition?" "Enough for maybe 2 days of sustained combat. We have 4 heavy weapons emplacements and 6 armored vehicles. But, sir, the Crixian force heading this way is estimated at over 10,000 troops with heavy armor support." Marcus handed the data pad back to Sarah. He took a deep breath and made his decision. "Gather all the officers. I want them in the command room in 10 minutes. "Sir, what should I tell them?" "Tell them we need to have a conversation about what kind of soldiers we want to be." 20 minutes later, Marcus stood before his officers in the command room. There were 12 of them, men and women from different parts of Earth and the colonies. Some were young and had joined the Defense Force seeking adventure. Others were veterans like Marcus who had seen more war than they cared to remember. "You have all seen the orders," Marcus began. "We are commanded to evacuate. The shuttle is waiting. If we leave now, we can be back in Terran space within a week." The officers exchanged glances. No one spoke. "But if we leave," Marcus continued, 12,000 Velthari civilians will be left to face the Crixian army alone. We all know what the Crixians do to civilian populations. We have seen the reports from other worlds." Sergeant Major Torres, a broad-shouldered woman with gray streaks in her dark hair, stepped forward. She had served with Marcus for 15 years. "Captain, are you suggesting we disobey a direct order from command?" "I am suggesting that we make a choice. The shuttle can only carry our people. There is no way to evacuate the Velthari. If we stay, we will be fighting alone without reinforcements against a vastly superior force. We will probably die." "So why would we stay?" asked Lieutenant Kim, a young officer who had only joined the unit 6 months ago. Marcus walked to the window and looked out at the refugee camp. The Velthari were going about their daily tasks, trying to maintain some sense of normal life even as their world fell apart around them. Children played in the dust between the tents. Elders sat in small groups, talking quietly. A few young males were helping the human soldiers stack sandbags around the perimeter. "Because they trusted us," Marcus said. "Because the Terran government made promises to them. Because we are supposed to be the good ones, the ones who help, the ones who protect the innocent." He turned back to face his officers. "I know what my orders say, but I also know what my conscience says, and right now they are not the same thing." The room was silent for a long moment. Then Tor spoke again. "I did not join the defense force to abandon civilians to slaughter. If you are staying, Captain, I am staying too." One by one, the other officers voiced their agreement. Even young Lieutenant Kim, his face pale but determined, nodded his acceptance. "Then we are all in agreement," Marcus said. "But I want to make something clear. This decision must be voluntary. Every soldier in this unit must have the chance to leave on that shuttle. No one will be forced to stay. No one will be judged for leaving. Is that understood?" The officers nodded. "Then let us talk to our people." That evening, Marcus addressed the entire unit. He stood on a supply crate in the center of the compound, with the orange light of the setting sun behind him. The soldiers gathered around, their faces tired and dirty from days of constant work preparing defenses. He explained the situation simply and directly, the orders to evacuate, the decision he and the officers had made, the risks of staying, and the choice that each soldier would have to make for themselves. "The shuttle leaves at midnight," he concluded. "Anyone who wants to be on it can be, no questions asked, no records kept. You have all served with honor and you deserve to make this choice for yourselves." The soldiers dispersed to consider their options. Marcus watched them go, wondering how many would choose to leave. He would not blame them if they did. They had families back home, lives waiting for them, dreams they still wanted to pursue. At midnight, the shuttle lifted off. Marcus stood at the edge of the landing pad and watched it rise into the dark sky. When he turned around, he saw that every single one of his soldiers had stayed. 120 humans standing together in the darkness, ready to fight for people who were not their own. Tors walked up beside him. Her rifle was slung over her shoulder, and there was a small smile on her weathered face. "Looks like you are stuck with us, Captain." Marcus felt something warm in his chest. Pride, perhaps, or maybe just gratitude for the people he served with. "Then let us get to work. We have a lot of preparations to make before the Crixians arrive." The next 3 days were a blur of constant activity. Marcus and his soldiers worked around the clock to prepare the refugee center for the coming assault. They dug trenches, built barriers, and set up defensive positions throughout the compound. Every building was reinforced. Every approach was covered by overlapping fields of fire. The Velthari watched at first with confusion, then with growing understanding. A delegation of their elders approached Marcus on the second day. The leader was an old male named Althean. His skin had faded to a pale silver with age, and his movements were slow and careful, but his eyes were sharp and clear. "Captain Chen," he said, his voice soft and musical in the way of all Velthari speech, "we have seen the other humans leave. Why do you remain?" Marcus set down the shovel he had been using to help dig a trench. He wiped the sweat from his forehead and faced the elder. "Because you need help, and we are able to help. But your government has ordered you to leave. We have heard this from our own sources. You risk everything by staying, your careers, your lives, perhaps even punishment for disobeying orders." "Perhaps," Marcus agreed, "but some things are more important than orders." Altheon studied him for a long moment. The old Velthari had lived for over 200 years. He had seen many things in his long life, but this seemed to surprise him. "We do not understand humans," he said finally. "You are young species, aggressive, sometimes cruel. We have seen how you fight among yourselves, how you destroy your own worlds with wars and pollution. We have wondered if you would ever grow beyond these things." "And now," Marcus asked, "now I see soldiers who could have fled to safety, who could have returned to their families and their comfortable lives. Instead, they dig in the dirt alongside aliens they barely know, preparing to fight an enemy that will surely overwhelm them." Altheon placed one of his long, thin hands on Marcus's shoulder. "Perhaps there is more to humanity than we understood." "We are not saints," Marcus said. "We have done terrible things throughout our history. We still do terrible things. But some of us try to do better. Some of us believe that the measure of a people is how they treat those who cannot help themselves." "Then let us help you," Altheon said. "My people are not warriors. We have no weapons training, but we have hands that can work. We can dig trenches, carry supplies, tend to the wounded, whatever you need." Marcus nodded. He had hoped the Velthari would offer to help. Every pair of hands would be needed in the days ahead. "We would be grateful for any assistance, but keep the children and the elderly back from the fighting positions. They will be safer in the central buildings." From that moment on, the humans and Velthari worked side by side. The refugees threw themselves into the preparations with desperate energy. Young males and females hauled sandbags and dug trenches. Elders organized supplies and prepared medical stations. Even the children helped, carrying water and food to the workers. Private First Class James Washington, a young soldier from the American sector of Earth, found himself working alongside a Velthari female named Celira. She was younger than most of the adults, perhaps equivalent to a human in her 20s. Her blue-gray skin had a slight purple tint that marked her as coming from the coastal regions of the northern continent. "You are very strong," she said, watching him lift a heavy crate of ammunition. "Are all humans so powerful?" James laughed. He was not particularly large by human standards. "Not really. Your world has lower gravity than Earth. Things feel lighter to us here." "That explains the way you walk," Celira said. "As if the ground is trying to hold you down. We thought it was strange at first, but now I see it is natural for you." "Everything is relative," James said. "On your world we are strong. On a high-gravity world we would be weak and slow. But you came here anyway, to a world that is not your own, to help people who are not your own. Why?" James set down the crate and thought about the question. It was something he had been asking himself since Captain Chen announced the decision to stay. "My grandmother used to tell me stories," he said finally, "about the old days on Earth, about times when people from different countries, different cultures would come together to help each other, not because they had to, not because there was anything to gain, just because it was the right thing to do. And this is the right thing." "I think so, I hope so." James picked up another crate. "I guess we will find out." On the third day, the scouts reported that the Crixian advance force was only 20 kilometers away. They would reach the refugee center by morning. Marcus called his officers together for a final briefing. The command room was crowded now, with Velthari representatives joining the Terran soldiers around the tactical display. The enemy force consists of approximately 10,000 infantry troops, supported by armored vehicles and artillery, Lieutenant Park reported. They are moving in a standard Crixian assault formation. Heavy armor in front, infantry following, artillery bringing up the rear. "What about air support?" Torres asked. "None reported so far. The Crixians have been using their air forces elsewhere. They may not consider this target worth the resources." "Small favors," Marcus muttered. "Airstrikes would have ended this fight before it began. What is our ammunition status?" "We have enough for maybe 3 days of sustained combat," said Sergeant Chen, the unit's logistics officer. "That includes the reserves we found in the abandoned supply depot." Marcus studied the tactical display. The refugee center was not built to be a fortress. It was a collection of buildings arranged around a central courtyard, originally designed as a commercial complex. But his soldiers had done good work. The approaches were covered by interlocking fields of fire. The buildings had been reinforced and connected by covered trenches. It was not perfect, but it would have to do. "Our goal is not to win," he reminded everyone. "Our goal is to delay. Every hour we hold is another hour for the Velthari to organize resistance elsewhere. Every enemy soldier we tie up here is one less soldier attacking other targets." He looked around the room at the faces of his soldiers and the Velthari who had joined them. "We are going to make them pay for every meter of ground. We are going to make this the most expensive victory they have ever won." Altheon stepped forward. The old Velthari had been listening quietly throughout the briefing. "Captain Chen, my people wish to express our gratitude. Whatever happens tomorrow, we want you to know that your sacrifice will not be forgotten. The Velthari have long memories. Your names will be remembered in our histories for generations to come." "Save the gratitude for after the battle," Marcus said. "We still have work to do." That night, as the soldiers rested in their positions and waited for dawn, Marcus walked through the compound. He checked on his troops, making sure they had what they needed, offering words of encouragement where he could. He found James Washington sitting on a pile of sandbags, staring up at the unfamiliar stars. "Cannot sleep?" Marcus asked, sitting down beside the young soldier. "Too much to think about, sir. This time tomorrow I might be dead. It is a strange thing to know." "Are you afraid?" "Yes, sir, but not as afraid as I thought I would be." James turned to look at his captain. "Is that normal?" "Fear is normal. Courage is not the absence of fear. It is the decision that something is more important than fear." Marcus pointed to the building where the Velthari children were sleeping. "Those kids in there, they are what is more important." "I keep thinking about what my grandmother would say. She always told me that a man is defined by what he is willing to stand for. I think she would be proud of what we are doing here." "I am sure she would be." Marcus stood up and clapped the young soldier on the shoulder. "Get some rest if you can. Tomorrow is going to be a long day." As Marcus walked away, he heard James whisper something under his breath. It sounded like a prayer. Marcus did not know if there was anyone listening, but he hoped so. They were going to need all the help they could get. The Crixians attacked at dawn. Marcus was in the command post when the first reports came in. Enemy forces had been spotted approaching from the north, moving fast across the open plains. The ground shook with the rumble of heavy armor. "All positions report ready," Lieutenant Park announced. "Enemy forces entering weapons range in 5 minutes." "Hold fire until they reach the first marker," Marcus ordered. "Let them get close. We want every shot to count." The Crixians were a brutal species. They stood over 2 meters tall, with thick gray skin and 4 arms that ended in clawed hands. Their eyes were small and red, set deep in armored skulls. They wore heavy combat gear and carried weapons that could tear through standard infantry armor. The first wave came with armored vehicles leading the charge. Massive tanks with energy cannons rolled across the plain, firing as they came. Explosions rocked the outer defenses. Sandbag walls were torn apart. A section of trench collapsed under a direct hit. "Return fire," Marcus commanded. The human heavy weapons opened up. Anti-armor missiles streaked across the battlefield, slamming into the lead tanks. One vehicle exploded in a ball of fire. Another lost a track and ground to a halt. The Crixian advance slowed as the tanks spread out, trying to avoid the deadly accurate fire from the defensive positions. Behind the tanks came the infantry. Thousands of Crixian soldiers charged forward, their war cries echoing across the plain. They moved with surprising speed for their size, their 4 arms pumping as they ran. Infantry engaging at Sector 2, Tors reported from her position on the eastern wall. Heavy contact, we are holding. Marcus watched the tactical display as the battle unfolded. His soldiers were fighting well, using their prepared positions to maximum effect. Every approach was covered by overlapping fields of fire. Every time the Crixians pushed forward, they were met with withering resistance. But the enemy had numbers on their side. For every Crixian that fell, 2 more took their place. The human soldiers could not be everywhere at once, and slowly, inevitably, the defensive line began to contract. "Sir, the northern sector is being overrun," Lieutenant Kim reported. His voice was strained but steady. "Sergeant Williams is requesting permission to fall back to the secondary line." "Granted. Tell him to take his wounded with him and destroy any supplies he cannot carry." The first day of battle stretched into evening. The Crixians pushed forward, the humans fell back, fighting for every meter of ground. By nightfall, the outer defenses had been abandoned, and the fighting had moved into the compound itself. Marcus moved between positions, directing the defense, encouraging his troops. He found James Washington manning a heavy machine gun on the western wall. The young soldier was covered in dust and blood, some of it his own. "How are you holding up?" Marcus asked. "Still here, sir." James wiped blood from his eyes with the back of his hand. "They keep coming and we keep knocking them down, but there are so many of them." "I know, just keep fighting, help is coming." It was a lie and they both knew it. No help was coming. The Terran government had made their position clear, but the lie gave them something to hold on to, and in battle, hope was just as important as ammunition. The Crixians pulled back at nightfall to regroup. Marcus used the pause to reorganize his defenses and tend to the wounded. The medical station was overflowing. Dr. Chen and her team worked without rest, patching up soldiers and sending them back into the fight. The Velthari had proven their worth throughout the day. They carried ammunition to the fighting positions. They helped move the wounded to safety. They fed the soldiers and kept the water flowing. Several had even taken up weapons from fallen soldiers and joined the fighting, despite having no training. Altheon found Marcus at the command post, studying the tactical display. "Captain, we have lost 23 of our people today. Not fighters, workers, support personnel. They were caught in the crossfire or killed by enemy artillery." "I am sorry," Marcus said. "I wish I could have protected them better." "Do not apologize. They died helping your soldiers. They died for something that mattered." The old Velthari's eyes glistened in the dim light. "That is more than many can say." "How are the children?" "Frightened but safe. We have moved them to the deepest part of the central building. The walls there are thickest." Altheon paused. "Some of them have been drawing pictures of human soldiers standing guard over Velthari families. They are calling your people the protectors." Marcus did not know what to say. He turned back to the tactical display, hiding the emotion on his face. "We will hold as long as we can," he said quietly. "I promise you that." The second day was worse than the first. The Crixians had learned from their initial assault. They used their artillery more effectively, pounding the human positions with constant bombardment. They probed the defenses from multiple directions, looking for weak points. When they found one, they would mass their forces and strike hard. By midday, the humans had been pushed back to the central compound. The outer buildings were in enemy hands. Fighting was now at close quarters, room to room, corridor to corridor. Marcus found himself on the front line, rifle in hand, fighting alongside his soldiers. A Crixian burst through a doorway, all 4 arms swinging. Marcus put 3 rounds into its chest and it fell. Another came behind it, and Tors cut it down with a burst from her submachine gun. "Fall back to the next junction," Marcus ordered. "Use the grenades to cover the withdrawal." The humans fell back in good order, leaving traps and obstacles behind them. Every room they gave up cost the Crixians blood. The hallways of the compound became killing grounds, choked with alien bodies. That night Marcus took stock of his remaining forces. Of the 120 soldiers who had chosen to stay, only 63 were still able to fight. The rest were dead or too badly wounded to continue. Ammunition was running low. Medical supplies were nearly exhausted. "We cannot hold another day like this," Tor said. Her arm was in a sling broken by a Crixian club, but she refused to leave the fighting. "If they hit us again with the same force, we will be overrun by noon." "I know." Marcus stared at the map of the compound. There was only one defensible position left, the central building where the Velthari civilians were sheltering. It was the strongest structure in the compound, with thick walls and multiple choke points, if they could hold it long enough. "Sir," Lieutenant Park interrupted, "I am picking up something on the long-range sensors. Multiple contacts approaching from the east." "More Crixians." "No, sir, the signature is different, it looks like. Terran ships." Marcus felt his heart stop. Terran ships here now. "Get me a communication link, now." The communications console crackled to life. A face appeared on the screen, a woman with sharp features and Admiral's insignia on her collar. Admiral Helena Voss, commander of the Terran Third Fleet. "Captain Chen," she said, "I am surprised to find you still alive." "Admiral, I am surprised to see you here. I was told no reinforcements would be coming." That was the official position, yes. The Admiral's expression was unreadable, but official positions have a way of changing when the public finds out about them. The public. Someone leaked the story, the whole story, about how your unit chose to stay and protect the Velthari civilians, about how the government ordered you to abandon them. It is all over the news networks. People are furious. Marcus glanced at Tors. She shook her head slightly. Neither of them had leaked anything. They had been too busy fighting to think about public relations. The Terran Assembly held an emergency session, Admiral Voss continued. By a vote of 312 to 47, they authorized a relief mission. My fleet was the closest available force, so here I am. How many ships? 12 warships and 20 troop transports. 10,000 soldiers ready to deploy. We should be in orbit within the hour. Marcus closed his eyes for a moment. 10,000 soldiers, more than enough to drive back the Crixians, more than enough to save the civilians. They were going to make it. "Admiral, we have wounded who need immediate evacuation, and the Crixians will likely launch another assault before you arrive. Can you provide orbital fire support?" "Already preparing for it. Send me your targeting coordinates. We will make sure the Crixians have something else to think about while we deploy." The news spread quickly through the compound. Soldiers who had been preparing for a last stand found themselves laughing and cheering. The Velthari heard the news and began singing, their high, musical voices echoing through the corridors. Marcus found Altheon in the central hall, surrounded by Velthari civilians. The old elder's eyes were wet with tears. "Help has arrived," Marcus said. "You are going to be safe." "We know, we have been listening to your communications." Altheon reached out and took Marcus's hand in both of his. "Captain Chen, I was wrong about your people. I thought humans were too young, too violent, too selfish to ever amount to anything, but I was looking at the wrong humans." "We are all different," Marcus said. "Some humans are selfish, some are cruel, but some of us try to be better. We try to live up to what we could be instead of settling for what we are. And you succeeded. You showed us what humanity can be, not the governments or the politicians or the admirals. Your soldiers, the ones who stayed when everyone else left." The Crixians launched their final assault an hour before the Terran fleet arrived. They came with everything they had, waves of soldiers and armor crashing against the last human positions. They knew that time was running out, and they were desperate to finish the job before reinforcements could intervene. But the humans held. They held in the corridors and the stairwells. They held at the barricades and the choke points. They held with rifles and grenades, and when the ammunition ran out, with knives and fists and anything else they could use as weapons. James Washington held his position at the main entrance until a Crixian blade took his left arm off at the elbow. Even then, he kept fighting with his right hand until Tors dragged him back to the medical station. Lieutenant Kim held the eastern wing with 7 soldiers against 100 Crixians. When his ammunition ran out, he picked up a fallen enemy's weapon and kept shooting. When that ran out, he used it as a club. The Velthari fought too. Civilians who had never held a weapon in their lives grabbed whatever they could find and stood alongside the human soldiers. They died in droves, but they did not run. They would not abandon the people who had not abandoned them. And then the sky lit up. Orbital strikes rained down on the Crixian forces. Precision weapons turned enemy armor into molten slag. Artillery positions vanished in pillars of fire. The assault faltered, then stopped, then reversed as the Crixians realized that the situation had changed dramatically. Dropships descended from the clouds, disgorging fresh Terran soldiers by the hundreds. They hit the Crixian rear like a hammer, driving into the confused enemy forces from multiple directions. Within 3 hours, the battle was over. The surviving Crixians had retreated, pursued by Terran aircraft. The compound was secure. The civilians were safe. Marcus stood in the courtyard as the medics loaded wounded onto evacuation shuttles. Of his 120 soldiers, only 34 were still standing. The rest were dead or seriously wounded. They had given everything they had. Admiral Voss found him there, staring at the rows of body bags being prepared for transport home. "Captain Chen," she said, "I have orders from the Assembly. You are to return to Earth immediately." "Am I being arrested?" Marcus asked. He was too tired to care about the answer. "No, you are being given a medal. The Assembly has decided that your actions here represent the highest traditions of the Terran Defense Force. They want to make you a hero." Marcus laughed bitterly. He pointed to the body bags. "The heroes are over there, Admiral. I just gave the orders." "Maybe, but someone has to stand up and take credit, or no one will remember what happened here. The public needs a face to attach to this story. You are that face, whether you like it or not." "What about the Velthari? What happens to them now?" "The Assembly has authorized a full military commitment to the defense of Velthos Prime. We are establishing a permanent base here. The Crixians will not take this world while we have soldiers to stop them." Marcus nodded slowly. It was something at least. The politicians had changed their minds because of public pressure, but at least they had changed their minds. The Velthari would be protected. "I will need to speak to my soldiers first, the ones who can still be spoken to." "Take your time, the shuttle will wait." Marcus walked through the compound, stopping at each group of his soldiers. He shook hands, exchanged words, shared moments of grief and quiet celebration. He visited the medical station where James Washington was recovering from the amputation of his arm. "They say I will be able to get a prosthetic," James said. His face was pale, but his spirit seemed intact. "A fancy new one that is better than the original. If I am lucky, I will be back on active duty within a year." "You should take your time, heal properly." "With respect, sir, I will heal the way I want to heal. I have unfinished business with the Crixians. They owe me an arm and I intend to collect." Marcus smiled for the first time in days. The young soldier's determination was exactly what he needed to see. "I am proud of you, Private. Your grandmother would be proud too." "Thank you, sir. That means more than any medal." 1 year later, Marcus Chen stood on a stage in the Great Hall of the Terran Assembly on Earth. Behind him, the flags of 100 human worlds hung from the vaulted ceiling. Before him, thousands of people had gathered to witness the ceremony. The past year had been a blur of ceremonies and speeches, interviews, and appearances. He had become, as Admiral Voss predicted, the face of the Velthos campaign. His image was on news feeds across human space. His story was taught in military academies. Children dressed up as him for holidays. He hated almost every minute of it. But today was different. Today, he was not here to receive another award or give another speech. Today, he was here to witness something more important. The Speaker of the Assembly stepped forward to the podium. We are gathered here today to formalize a historic agreement between the Terran Assembly and the Velthari Confederation. An agreement that was forged not in the halls of diplomacy, but in the fire of battle. An agreement written not in the language of politics, but in the blood of soldiers who refused to abandon those in need. Marcus looked to the side of the stage, where a delegation of Velthari stood in their finest ceremonial robes. Altheon was among them, representing the Council of Elders. The old Velthari had aged visibly in the past year, but his eyes were still sharp, and his spirit was undiminished. The terms of the Velthos Accord are simple, the speaker continued. Full military alliance between our peoples, mutual defense against any aggressor, shared technology, shared resources, and shared commitment to the principles that Captain Marcus Chen and his soldiers demonstrated on that battlefield 1 year ago. Altheon stepped forward to sign the accord, his hand steady despite his age. The human representative signed next. The document was sealed with the emblems of both civilizations. The crowd erupted in applause. Marcus joined in, clapping until his hands hurt. This was what mattered. This was the legacy of those who had died on Velthos Prime, not the medals or the speeches or the fame. This alliance. This promise that the two peoples would stand together against the darkness. After the ceremony, Marcus found a quiet corner of the reception hall. He was nursing a drink when Altheon found him. "You look tired, Captain," the old Velthari said. "The burdens of heroism do not sit easily on your shoulders." "I am not a hero. I have said it 1,000 times, but no one listens." "They do not listen because it does not matter whether you believe it. What matters is what you did, what your soldiers did. You gave my people hope when we had none. You showed the galaxy that humans can be something more than conquerors and profiteers. We almost failed, if the fleet had arrived an hour later. But they did not. And do you know why they came at all?" Altheon smiled, a gesture that Marcus had learned to recognize after many months of working with Velthari. It was not the politicians or the military leaders. It was the ordinary humans who saw your story and demanded action. Your people rose up and forced their government to do the right thing. That is the true power of what you accomplished. Marcus thought about that. He had focused so much on the battle itself, on the soldiers who had fought and died, that he had never really considered the larger impact of their stand. "I received a message from Celira," he said, changing the subject. "The young woman who worked with Private Washington during the preparations. She has been accepted into the Velthari Diplomatic Corps." "Yes, I know. She specifically requested to be assigned to the human embassy. She says she wants to build bridges between our peoples. Many of the young ones feel the same way. They see the alliance not as a political necessity, but as a true partnership." "And Washington, have you heard about him?" "The young soldier who lost his arm. Yes, I have followed his story. He returned to active duty 3 months ago. I understand he has become quite proficient with his prosthetic. He requested to be assigned to the Velthos garrison. He says he has unfinished business there." Altheon nodded slowly. "Your people have a saying, I believe, something about finishing what you start." "Something like that." The two of them stood in silence for a moment, watching the crowds of humans and Velthari mingling at the reception. A year ago, such a scene would have been impossible. The Velthari had seen humans as aggressive and unreliable, useful for trade but not to be trusted with anything important. Now, the two peoples were learning to work together, to understand each other, to build something that neither could build alone. "What will you do now?" Althean asked. "You could have any position you want. Ambassador, admiral, even a seat in the assembly if you wanted it." "None of those. I am going back to Velthos Prime." "Back to the war?" "Back to my soldiers, the ones who stayed and the new ones who have joined us since. That is where I belong, not in meeting halls and reception parties." Marcus finished his drink and set the glass aside. "I made a promise to those people on Velthos Prime. I promised we would protect them. That promise is not fulfilled until the Crixians are driven off their world entirely. The campaign could take years." "Then it takes years. I have nowhere else I would rather be." Althean reached out and clasped Marcus's hand in the Velthari gesture of deep respect. "You are a good man, Marcus Chen. Your people should be proud of what you represent." "I represent nothing but the soldiers who serve with me. They are the ones who should be remembered." "They will be. My people have already begun building a memorial on the site of the refugee center. Every name will be carved in stone. Every sacrifice will be remembered. For as long as the Velthari exist, we will tell the story of the humans who stayed." Marcus nodded. It was more than he could have hoped for, more than any of them could have hoped for when they made the decision to disobey orders and stay behind. "There is one more thing," Althean said. "The children from the refugee center, the ones who called your soldiers the protectors, they have grown now. Some of them have joined the Velthari defense forces. They say they want to fight alongside the humans, to repay the debt." "There is no debt." "To them there is, and perhaps that is the greatest gift you gave us. Not just survival, but inspiration. A generation of Velthari who believe in standing up for what is right, even when it costs everything. A generation who learned that lesson from humans." Later that night, Marcus boarded a military transport bound for Velthos Prime. He sat in the cargo hold with a group of young soldiers, fresh recruits heading to their first deployment. They looked at him with a mixture of awe and nervousness, unsure how to act around a living legend. "Sir," one of them finally asked, "is it true what they say about the battle at the refugee center?" "That depends on what they say." "That you held off 10,000 Crixians with just 100 soldiers. That you refused to leave even when the government ordered you to. That you and your people were willing to die for aliens you had never met." Marcus looked at the young faces surrounding him. They were so young, so eager, so full of idealism that the universe had not yet beaten out of them. "It is true," he said. "Every word of it. We stayed because it was the right thing to do. We fought because there were people who needed protecting, and we did not give up because that is not who we are." He leaned forward, looking each of them in the eye. "That is who you are now too, part of something bigger than yourself, part of a tradition that says humans do not abandon those in need, no matter what the cost, no matter what anyone says." The young soldiers sat up a little straighter. Their eyes burned a little brighter. "We will make you proud, sir," the one who had spoken said. "I know you will, you already have." The transport lifted off and climbed into the night sky. Through the small viewport, Marcus could see the lights of the city falling away below, then the curve of the earth appearing against the blackness of space. Somewhere out there, beyond the stars, was Velthos Prime, his soldiers, his mission, his purpose. He thought about the soldiers who had died in that first battle, about Tors, who had survived and was now training the next generation of defenders, about James Washington, who had returned to fight with a prosthetic arm and an unbroken spirit, about the Velthari children who had grown up calling humans the protectors. The story was not over. The Crixians were still a threat. The galaxy was still a dangerous place. There would be more battles, more sacrifices, more hard choices. But that was all right, because they would face it together. Humans and Velthari, soldiers and civilians, the strong protecting the weak, the brave standing against the darkness. That was what it meant to be human, not the wars or the conquests or the empires. The moments when ordinary people chose to do extraordinary things, when they decided that some things were worth fighting for, even dying for, when they proved that humanity, for all its flaws, could rise above them. Marcus Chen settled back in his seat and closed his eyes. Tomorrow he would be back on Velthos Prime, back with his soldiers, back in the fight. He could not wait.